Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I'd review this little video that I thought would be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, I believe, by the boxing channel known as BRUCE MF VANE. And I saw this video overall that I thought looked a little bit interesting, thought that it would be a good video to review, kind of for a multitude of reasons. Not only to address a narrative, but also just to address a certain amount of the politics, not just within that of boxing, but also just, within a certain amount of people. And, this video I thought was very particularly interesting for a multitude of reasons. Not only, first of all, is he talking about Canelo Alvarez, who, of course, has an up and coming fight against Terence Crawford. Not only is he talking about his resume, and of course, when you talk about the channels of the LDBC and new media, we pretty much know what the main average narrative is going to be, that Canelo Alvarez has an overrated resume. He's someone that never fought anybody in their prime, and overall, he's someone that's one to, we basically already know the main narratives. That being stated, of course, are they the only channels with narratives out there? Are they the only demographic, or the only race out there that has, that of a agenda? No, of course not. I've seen channels like that of BDA Boxing and, that of Precise Presenter or Fight Film that, in my personal view, is very obvious that, at least at times, that they have a racialized motivation as well. And there might be other channels out there as well that I'm not thinking of, but I can't really think of any. But the point overall is that, the majority of a lot of the certain amount of popular channels, that I see out there, that they have been a lot of the LDBC and new media boxing channels. And a lot of them, it just is what it is. A lot of them do have, racialized or somewhat racist agendas. It just is what it is. But anyways, that being stated, of course, this man overall was talking about Canelo Alvarez. But the reason why he's reacting in the way that he is, and you can tell overall, is because he's gotten very, very tired of dealing with a certain amount of fans or fan bases that he believes are quote unquote racist or very racialized. And I agree. One thing that I've always agreed with, although I agree with very little of what Aki TV and Dante's Boxing Nation usually have to say, because both of those guys are, pretty much very manipulative politicians and pretty much morons at that. There's very little that they say that I actually agree with. But on top of that, one of the things overall that they've stated that I've always agreed with is that boxing is very much based on race, nationality, and pride. And I've always agreed with that. But of course, it's not just the quote unquote Mexicans or the Latinos or the Caucasoids. It's also, of course, everybody involved. But that's why you have to be very, very careful, because if you are not a logical or an objective person and don't know how to look past certain things, and also to a degree don't let certain things kind of brush off your shoulder, or let certain things affect you, it can be very, very easy to turn into a fanboy or someone that is very, very bitter. And that's what a certain amount of these LDBC and, new media guys are. They're basically overall just black commentators that are very, very bitter because, of course, they believe that a certain amount of their fighters and them as a people, especially within that of the westernized societies, that they've been victims, of marginalization and, of course, embarrassment and double standards and racism. And, of course, to a great degree, that is very, very true. But unfortunately, it's created this bitter mindset and this victimization mindset to where I'm not claiming overall that there's not a whole bunch of racism that does not happen against that of black fighters or black people overall within that of America. Of course, there is. But if you're just taking a look at every situation that is the same, that's when the problem starts to come in. When you start to generalize overall basically everything, then you're basically no better than the people that are starting to judge you. And in no way am I just, trying to claim that, forgive and forget and all this sort of stuff. But what I am claiming is this. If you're a person that does have that type of mindset and is very clearly coming from a bitter type of standpoint, then how can I ever rely on you for a logical or an objective analysis? What you have to realize, and no matter who you are, is that the average person, no matter what they're telling you, or usually what they're analyzing, the average person is really a fucking idiot. And I know that to certain people overall that, that's going to come across as, very blunt and very rude and very pompous and arrogant, whatever it is. But the average person overall, if you're smart enough to know, the average person is a fucking moron. The average thing overall that they just see, they give a surface level analysis. They don't really bother to do any research or do anything in depth. They basically just go off of a narrative, and that's really about it. We all have our talents, we all have our gifts, but in terms of max level intelligence or being able to read in between the lines or see past the surface, does the average person have that ability? No, they don't. It just is what it is. But that's a part of the reason why I started this channel, because I'm not a person that goes off of narratives. I don't go off of racial bullshit. I do not let what others, say affect me to the degree that it's going to affect my analysis or my predictions or anything like that. I'm going to overall tell you what I personally see, no matter the fighter, no matter their race, whatever it is, because I don't get involved in stupid shit like that. But that's a part of the reason overall why, once again, I review these channels. But anyways, let's see overall what the man has to say about Canelo Alvarez, because you can tell that he's definitely had to deal with it from that of a lot of the Canelo Alvarez fanboys. And listen, I get it to a great degree. I've not had to deal with the Canelo Alvarez fan base like that, because a lot of the stuff that I've said about Canelo has been mainly positive. But of course, the narrative from that of the LDBC and new media, they've always stated that Canelo really has an overrated resume and he aged out fighters, never fought anyone in their prime. Do I agree with that? No, I don't. But we'll be talking about that as the video goes along, because he brought up some points that I thought were interesting and were very revelatory of himself as a person. But let's get into it.
This isn't the same Canelo Alvarez. Canelo has regressed as a fighter and isn't the same as he was during his undisputed run at 168. This isn't the same fighter that broke Billy Joe Saunders' will and orbital bone, stopped Caleb Plant and had Callum Smith shelling up in fear. Canelo has lost his explosiveness and the pop in his shots that he once had.
And pretty much everything that man just stated has pretty much been true. For those of you that have seen my channel within out of the past few years, you know that I've stated that pretty much ever since his Bevo performance, Canelo Alvarez has really not been the same fighter. It's not that he's still not a great fighter or that he hasn't had great moments, but he's just very steadily declined. It's just very obvious. He doesn't have the same timing. He doesn't have the same snap. He doesn't have the same speed. He just doesn't have the same anything anymore. It just is what it is. But it's okay. All fighters age. It's just, a part of the athletic life. It's a part of life. It is what it is. That being stated, there are a certain amount of people that, of course, refuse that fact. And then, of course, wanted to, kind of make excuses, just in case Crawford beats Canelo Alvarez. And then, overall, they kind of want to turn around and do a 180 when before they were claiming that Canelo Alvarez, oh, you're just hating. He was at peak form, but then all of a sudden, because they're afraid he might lose, they're all of a sudden making excuses. Of course, there are people that are like that. But the thing is about BRUCE MF VANE and some of these other guys, they let those people just get inside their heads just way, way, way too much. And that's why I can't ever rely on an analyzation from that of a BRUCE MF VANE, because he's letting a lot of these racialized or racist dudes just get in his head way, way, way too goddamn much. And it affects their quote-unquote truth-telling. These guys, even if they wanted to tell the absolute truth, they really can't do it. And to a degree, we all see things a little bit differently. So, the truth overall, what's the truth to me may not absolutely be the truth to you. But as long as you can provide some sort of evidence for it, then, I'm at least okay with it and I can respect it. But the thing is that what a lot of these guys do is that, they'll see a lot of the hate that, or excuses that some of these other fan bases do. And they say, well, in order to get back at you, I'm going to do the same thing because I want to get back at you. And I overall want to get the satisfaction of also getting one over on you. And I'm not focused on that shit. If you have that mindset of that, then you have the wrong type of mindset to be a quote-unquote logical and objective analyzer, which is why, once again, 95% of people, no matter what they're talking about, especially if it's somewhat emotionally or politically based, they cannot be trusted for an objective or logical analyzation, because the average person, man or woman, they just let people get in their head way too easy.
Had a stoppage in his last 7 fights and has gone the distance with below-average fighters like Edgar Berlanga. He's more flat-footed, telegraphs his shots, and isn't as slick with the counters as he...
Well, I pretty much agree with everything there, except the Edgar Berlanga point. I don't think that Edgar Berlanga is below average. I think that he's above average. But the problem is that to beat a fighter like a Canelo Alvarez or a Terence Crawford, you can't just be above average. Like, I've seen Crawford fight a ton of above average fighters, like Aegis Velasquez and Jose Benavidez. Like, those guys are above average fighters. Julius Ndango, some other guys like that. But when you're talking about being above average, it's not enough to beat some of the greatest fighters of all time. And when you talk about Terence Crawford and Canelo Alvarez, like, those are some of the guys that literally could be debated as the top 30 greatest fighters of all time. You're not going to beat a fighter like that, even at a lower point in their career, just by being, an above average fighter or a good fighter. Sometimes you're not even going to beat them being a great fighter unless you have some sort of advantage over them, like you just have the wrong type of style to beat them, or you have a physical advantage over them, or in some sort of way, or if you're just more skilled than them, like what a Floyd was over Canelo. But I mean, the thing is that to beat fighters like that, you have to literally be all-time great level or have some sort of advantage. And Canelo and Crawford, in my view, they're about a level above certain fighters, even like a De La Hoya, a Cotto, a Marquez, and a Mosley. Like, they're a level above those guys. So you're not just going to beat these guys. And you even had to have some sort of physical advantage or be relatively all-time great to beat those guys usually. Or, maybe not all-time great, but at least great. Canelo and Crawford, you have to be all-time great to defeat those guys. Those guys are at least a level above the guys that I mentioned, like De La Hoya, Cotto, Mosley, and Marquez. You have to be a level, even above those guys. Anyway.
Once was. Terence Crawford is fighting a version of Canelo Alvarez he can beat. If this fight happened hypothetically in 2021, Terence Crawford would have been stopped in under 5 rounds. Crawford seems to be putting on the weight well, and he's already athletically and functionally gifted. We'll see.
Well, my thing about Terence Crawford is this, and what I'll state is this. I don't believe that Terence Crawford has as much wear and tear on him as what a Canelo does. Canelo Alvarez has been fighting for longer. It just is what it is in the pros. He's also fought fighters that have been legitimately bigger than him, more than what a Crawford has. And I understand that certain people are going to say, what are you talking about? Crawford started off at 135. He's been fighting bigger fighters, but no, he really hasn't. And I've already stated this. When you take a look at Canelo Alvarez, take a look at every fight other than the Jermell Charlo fight at 168, and you tell me that those fighters are comparable in size. There's not one fighter that Canelo Alvarez has fought at 168 where he's been the same size as them. He's always been smaller than them. Even John Ryder. Like, there's not one fighter that is smaller than him. John Ryder is bigger than him. Caleb Plant is bigger than him. Edgar Berlanga is bigger than him. Jaime Munguia is bigger than him. Other than Billy Joe Saunders, I mean, literally every other fighter that he fought there was bigger than him. Canelo is someone that, can fit more there at this point in time in his career. But Canelo Alvarez is really someone that's more of a natural middleweight. When you take a look at Crawford is someone that very obviously he was going to, eventually grow into the 147-pound weight class. And when you talk about multiple weight division champions, sometimes they start at a weight class where it's very obvious that they're not going to last there for more than a few years. Terence Crawford started off at 135. He could last there for a few years. He wasn't going to last there for the rest of his career. Not being 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach and rehydrating at 160 pounds, it would have been impossible. There's no way. He would have been completely drained. Even at 140, he was hydrating 20 pounds over the weight limit. Like, take a look at Devin Haney. When he was in his early 20s, he could fight at 135, but he had to eventually move out of there because he couldn't fight there anymore. Now, Canelo overall can't fight at 160 anymore, but that's really more because he's kind of adjusted to this weight class, and he doesn't want to lose that much weight anymore. It would probably drain him at this point because he's just been so much adjusted to that weight, but he's not a natural 168-pounder. So that's why I say Terence Crawford is someone that is a natural 147-pounder. When you take a look at him in size comparative to Spence, comparative to some of the other guys that he's fought there, he's the same size as those guys. It just is what it is. He is a natural welterweight fighter, and you have to realize, if you know enough about boxing, which fighter probably belongs more where. And Terence Crawford is someone that belongs more at the 147-pound weight class. When you're rehydrating 20 pounds over the weight class, especially in your early 20s, like, you don't belong in that weight class. Or not early 20s, excuse me, but in your 20s.
Retains his speed and footwork, but he's fighting the right version of Canelo.
But Terence Crawford, in my personal view, once again, is not at his absolute peak anymore. The man is almost 38 years old. He's someone that very clearly slowed down a little bit in his last fight, both the age and also the weight gain. And it appears that he's going to gain a certain amount of weight, and he's also been out of the ring for a year. So I'm also not going to sit here and pretend that Terence Crawford is just at his absolute peak anymore. Neither Canelo nor Crawford are at their absolute peak anymore. That's just the facts of the matter. That being stated, do I believe that Crawford has, less wear and tear on him? Yes, he does. And we'll be talking about the age as the fight goes along. Or, excuse me, as the video goes along. Because I'm sure, of course, certain people will mention that factor. But I'll explain once again why we can't always just count age.
He was fighting another version of Canelo Alvarez. He'd be knocked out. This is wrong with these so-called boxing content creators, man.
BRUCE MF VANE pulling out his best Crocodile Dundee impression. Or Steve Irwin. Crikey.
They They got so much of their personal issues wrapped up in this sport, they can't be real to say they life. Let me ask you a question. When has Canelo ever fought anybody in their prime? Who? When?
This has basically been another pro-blackity point overall by a lot of these LDBC and new media dudes that once again are very bitter. All this shit overall about who has Canelo ever fought in their prime. He fought Austin Trout in his prime when he was undefeated and in his 20s. He fought Lara when he was in his prime and in his 20s. He fought, Gennady Golovkin when he was 36 years old, but still was at a prime point in his career. Now, overall, certain people will say, well, Gennady was 36. He couldn't have been at his prime. Well, just because a fighter is a little bit older still doesn't mean that they're not in their prime. Take a look at Artur Beterbiev, for example. Take a look at Lennox Lewis. Take a look at, other certain fighters like that. Just because they're older still does not mean that they're not in their prime. Now, are there certain fighters that are at that age and they don't age well? Yeah, of course. But I mean, just because you're 36 or even in your late 30s doesn't always necessarily mean that you're not at a prime form in your career. There have even been certain fighters in their early 40s that have still been at a prime point in their career, like Archie Moore and Bernard Hopkins.
Name them. Who?
And once again, just to name other fighters, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, he fought, what was his name? Danny Jacobs, at his prime, Gennady Golovkin, Jamel Charlo, although, of course, he moved them up a couple of weight classes, Jaime Munguia. Those would be some of the A-grade level wins that I would count. Now, of course, certain people would state, well, he fought Golovkin at 36, and Golovkin was really showing signs of slippage. Was Golovkin really showing signs of slippage, or did he show a little bit of weaknesses in a competitive fight against Danny Jacobs? I don't understand what people were expecting. Were you expecting Gennady Golovkin to knock out Danny Jacobs the same way that he knocked out Matthew Macklin and Marco Antonio Rubio? It wasn't going to happen. Danny Jacobs was a guy that was a very tall and lengthy and skilled boxer who had one-shot knockout power in either hand. And before the Peter Quillen fight, Peter Quillen was looked to be the second best middleweight in the world before that of Danny Jacobs. And Danny Jacobs knocked him out in round one. Like what? You expected Gennady Golovkin to knock him out within 5 rounds? It wasn't going to happen. So, I mean, when people are saying that Gennady was clearly slowing down, was he really slowing down? Or was he just fighting against a fighter that was the second best middleweight in the world? I mean, to me, that doesn't make any sense. To me, when a fighter is showing slippage, you can see clear signs against fighters that really overall shouldn't be doing as well against them. And when you take a look against Gennady Golovkin, for example, after the 2 Canelo fights, he didn't have as much left in the tank anymore, because he was starting to have problems against guys like Steve Rolls and Sergey Derevyanchenko. That's when Golovkin was starting to show signs of slippage.
Who? The first big credit that Canelo got came from fighting Miguel Cotto.
Well, actually, that's not true, but I understand what the man is trying to state. I think what he's trying to state is Canelo fighting a quote-unquote pound-for-pound or all-time great level fighter, but that's not true. The first big fight that Canelo actually got credit for an A-grade fight was Austin Trout. But I understand what the man is trying to state. That being stated, Miguel Cotto, he was 35 at the time. Was he still an A-grade level fighter? Yes, he was. Miguel Cotto was someone that was a little bit refurbished and a little bit more revived at that point in time in his career. And it was obvious that he added a little bit to his game. And he still was a very athletic prime fighter. Now, if you want to state that he wasn't at his absolute peak, that's up to you. But he was still the WBC middleweight champion of the world when Canelo Alvarez had fought him. So once again, this stuff about Cotto overall just not being, too old and all that is horse shit. Once again. But anyways, point is that Cotto was still at a great point. Now, the Kovalev fight, I do understand why many people would not claim that that's an A-grade level win. In my view, it is an A- level win. Now, had they been more similar in size, I would understand the point. But the thing is that, although Kovalev, obviously, he didn't have the most amount of time, to recover from that, Canelo was not someone that's anywhere really near the natural size of a Kovalev. Canelo was someone that got bigger for that fight, but he's someone that had to adjust to the weight. He had to gain weight for that fight. He was not someone that was ever a natural light heavyweight. And I've always told people this, name another fighter that is of Canelo's stature that's 5'7" with a 70-inch arm reach that has been a super middleweight champion. It's never happened. It's never happened. Name another light heavyweight fighter past the light heavyweight era where they had fighters like Archie Moore and stuff like that who have been 5'7". It's never happened. Or it hasn't happened usually. Anyway, so I mean, the point is that what Canelo has done, I don't think a lot of people realize that you have to be not just a great fighter, you have to literally be an all-time great, exceptional level fighter to do what he's done. to be 5'7" and beat guys that at times are 6 foot and over, and at times looked at as legit A-grade level fighters, like Callum Smith and Danny Jacobs and Caleb Plant and certain guys like that, Jamel Charlo, other guys like that. Although of course Charlo was moved up, but Charlo's really more of a fucking middleweight. That guy's a weight bully at 154 if I've ever seen one. But anyway. But as for the Kovalev fight, once again, Kovalev didn't have the most amount of time to recover, but Kovalev is someone that is a natural light heavyweight. He still was coming off of 2 great dominant wins, and he was a champion. He wasn't the same fighter anymore, but he was still a fighter that could have been top 20, top 25 pound per pound. So I still give Canelo an A- level win. Now, had that been maybe a fight against Dimitri Bivol, then maybe I'd get it. But the fact that it was Canelo, and Canelo was about 1.5 weight classes outside of his zone, nah.
Oh, we already know about Triple G, and that's one of his big fights. Had to age his ass out. He's never fought anybody in their prime. But I got something.
Not true once again. And he fought Golovkin at his prime. I'm just gonna state that right there. Golovkin was taking a look at on a lot of lists as the #1 pound per pound fighter, or certain lists even debatably as the #1 pound per pound fighter, I believe by Ring Magazine, although I probably would have not put him there, but that's what they took a look at him as. He was at his peak. And I understand that people say he was a bit older, right? So just because you're a bit older does not mean that you're not at the peak of your career. Take a look at Usyk just a few years ago. Like, he was about 36 years old. He still was at the peak of his career. He's not quite at the peak anymore. You can tell that he's clearly slowing down, but he still had a relative great, performance in his career. Like, how many fighters would you favor over Alexander Usyk right now? And all those fighters are younger than him. How many of those fighters would you favor over him? Even though he has shown some signs of slippage. And Gennady did not really show that many signs of slippage, in my view, if any, by the time that he fought Canelo in those 2 fights. The only sign was that he had a close fight with Danny Jacobs. And, I mean, come on, like I said, what'd you expect? Anyway, and then, of course, when you take a look at other fighters, Better Beef, I mean, still in his late 30s, he still was a great fighter. An athlete, once again, and I've already stated this, they're a lot like a car. You can't always just take a look at a fighter and take a look at their age or the model number or all this other stuff and just say, oh, that car must be in way better condition because it has less miles on it and all this other stuff. Because the point is that you don't know the type of damage that they all have inside. Everyone ages differently. Like, you may go to a used car salesman and you might take a look at a car from 2017 and it has, 30,000 miles on it. Then you take a look at a car from 2014 and it has 40,000 miles on it. And you must say, oh, well, the 2017 is the better option because it has 10,000 less miles and it's the newer model, right? But you may not know some of the damage that is inside. It may have been driven more poorly. It may have been more on rough terrain. They may have bumped it around a little bit more, hit more potholes, So that car, although it may have more miles on it, there might be certain things, if you're not a mechanic or if you don't have a keen eye, if you don't know what to look out for, that you may not see. And you may end up getting a lemon when you thought that you were getting a better option.
Better than that. If Canelo hasn't been the same fighter that he supposedly has been in years, then what was y'all doing putting him pound for pound over Crawford? If Crawford is fighting a...
I understand what you're trying to say, Mr. BRUCE MF VANE, but this is also something that we have to try to avoid. Because what people who get emotional and bitter, they talk to all the fans, all the delusional ass fans, like everyone has just been doing that. Canelo Alvarez has legit not been the #1 pound per pound fighter for a good, solid 3 years at the very least. I mean, Canelo's fans, of course, have probably put him up there, but the rest of the world has basically not had him there for a while. I mean, a lot of people didn't even have him there once he lost to Bivol. I mean, to me, it was kind of a little bit early to decide because Canelo Alvarez, I don't think ever belonged there in the first place, and he was fighting debatably the best light heavyweight in the world, But I mean, the point is that, overall, pretty much after that, Canelo was not really the for sure #1 pound per pound fighter. So the point is that Canelo has been deranked there for the past 3 years by almost every list.
Right version of Canelo, then what was Canelo doing at pound for pound #1 if y'all been seeing that he was shitty and he's declining and blase split? He was still #1 of y'all, even with all those.
Right, but what the guy overall claimed, at least in that video, is that Canelo Alvarez, that it's not the same Canelo that broke down Saunders and Caleb Plant. When Canelo was #1 pound per pound, he was #1 pound per pound during his years, not only possibly slightly at the middleweight division, but also especially during his super middleweight reign. Like, his pound per pound years were from the Sergey Kovalev fight. That's when he probably just hit the number one pound for pound spot in my view, all the way probably from the Dmitry Bivol fight, maybe slightly after that. So I mean, I'm not quite sure overall if he's pissed off because Canelo at that time was still ranked over him, and he thought that he didn't deserve it. But even if we were going to use that point, no, Canelo was the number one pound for pound fighter. The resume, was just it was too notable. And it's no offense against Crawford, but he just didn't have that many great wins at that particular time. It just is what it is. He did not have that one great career win that he needed to be the debatable number one pound for pound fighter. It just is what it is. And then if you're talking about afterwards, how many people really counted Canelo as the true number one pound for pound fighter after his loss to Bivol?
Flaws that y'all talk about, even while being slow, even while y'all put him above Bud. Did you or did you not?
And
all right.
And once again, this is another thing about a lot of these LDBC channels. Like, they love to do this shit, overall. And don't get it twisted. I'm not claiming that other channels or other demographics don't do this. But the LDBC and new media, especially being these victimization, pro-blackity black commentators, they love to always go on this bullshit about, well, Crawford, the reason why he's not ranked number one, is because of racism, all this other bullshit. It's like, no, bro, that's not the reason why it is. The reason why Crawford usually is not ranked as the number one pound for pound is because for a very long fucking time, his best win was like Victor Postol. That was the reason why. People can like it, they cannot like it.
Yeah, so you showing the whole world that you feel that this dude is the goods. You guys wait till Terence Crawford fight him to try to discredit him. This is what see, I told you, they upset. They can't call him old because Bud older than him. Okay?
Right, but here's also the thing, once again, just because a fighter is older, once again, it's all about wear and tear. It's not necessarily about the age. Like, when you take a look at Lennox Lewis when he fought Mike Tyson, certain people may say, well, Lennox Lewis was older than Mike Tyson, right? But Mike Tyson was done at that point. Like, Mike Tyson was not a great championship level fighter anymore. Lewis was older at the time, sure, but he was still someone that still had some miles left to go. Mike Tyson was done. That card was over. Like, there was nothing left overall. I mean, I'm not going to say there was nothing left, but, he basically was on his last legs. Like, it was almost like a championship basketball team that, overall had kind of won 3 out of the last 4 championships, and then they end up getting blitzkrieged in the playoffs, and then, they go to the playoffs next year, and they end up either getting first rounded or second rounded. Like, that kind of was like, the 2011 LA Lakers, when they lost to the Dallas Mavericks.
They can't say that he's too young. And this is the thing. If this is no longer the fighter that he used to be, whose fault is that when Terence Bud Crawford is older? He's an older man. At one point, y'all was using like, yeah, Terence Crawford's older. Let's not forget Canelo's younger. All right, what's the point of bringing up Canelo's younger if you talk about he's already broke down at a young age before Crawford?
And I do agree with that point. And basically what he's trying to state overall, at least I believe, is that if you're making these points about how Canelo Alvarez would whip Crawford's ass because he's younger, but then all of a sudden this fight happens and, all of a sudden you're doing the 180 and being hypocritical, and doing the shit about, oh, well, Canelo really has more age. But, of course, I see this with a multitude of channels. That's like the same shit that Aki and Dante's Boxing Nation do. They do the same shit overall. And then, once again, this is not me trying to deflect blame. But, like, overall, that's the same shit that I see a lot of these channels do, like Aki TV and Dante. Like, they love to do this shit about, Canelo, he's avoiding Crawford and all sort of stuff. But then when the fight happens, if Canelo whoops his ass, then all they're just going to state overall is that Crawford was too small. And that's why so many of these LDBC guys, they push so hard for this fight because it's a win-win for them. If Crawford ends up beating that at Canelo, then they can state all this stuff about how overrated Canelo was and try to get away with the narrative that Canelo Alvarez, that he lost every elite fight in his career and he was super overrated, blah, blah, blah. But if Crawford loses, then they can just say, oh, well, he was too small and this is Canelo Alvarez's biggest victory. So what does that say about how great Canelo truly is? So once again, it's a win-win situation for them. And then they can just bitch afterwards about how he should have fought David Benavidez. So, I mean, thing is that it's a win-win-win situation for them. They can't lose.
I mean, he loses right there as far as elite ability.
But just to compare another example, not including a black fighter, or at least overall, in, that case, it was very similar with the Lomachenko-Devin Haney fight. I'll never forget. You had a lot of fighters, or excuse me, not a lot of fighters, but a lot of fans or a lot of commentators stating that Lomachenko would whoop his ass, and then all of a sudden, when that fight was about to happen because they didn't expect it to happen. Then all of a sudden they were saying Lomachenko was too small, he was too old, blah, blah, blah. And listen, Lomachenko definitely was smaller and was a bit older than Devin Haney. Just is what it is. But that being stated, if you're one of these guys that loves to talk all this shit, when you think that the fight's not going to happen, keep your money where your mouth is. I don't like it when people do that shit either. And I've had a certain amount of people to deal with that as well. But anyway.
If we talking about boxing, he's younger than Terence Crawford and already broke down and already this and already that. Already? Makes no sense. If you thought Canelo was a joke or a bum or he had slowed down, he had no business at pound for pound #1 for 3 years. Y'all should have had Terence Crawford there, but y'all didn't want that.
Well, here's my question to you, Mr. Bruce MF Vane. Are you talking about Canelo Alvarez's reign during the beginning of his super middleweight reign, or are you talking about, overall, within the past 3 years? I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, because I don't think, anyone with a logical mind would debate too much that Canelo Alvarez, that he was just quote-unquote undeserving of it. I think he was very deserving of the #1 pound-for-pound spot for about those 3 years when he was there. But has anyone really had Canelo Alvarez at the #1 pound-for-pound spot for the past 3 years? I think that Crawford kind of had it, once he beat Spence. But then Usyk probably got it after he defeated Fury. And he's very deserving of that spot.
So don't wait till he fight him now tomorrow. Yeah, he's fighting the right version. The same way Canelo fought the right version of Triple G. Come on, let's get...
Triple G was at a better point in his career than what a Canelo Alvarez is right now fighting Crawford. And I know that a lot of people are going to disagree with that, but the signs of slippage that Canelo has shown over the past few years, Golovkin never showed signs of slippage. I mean, really, to be quite honest with you, he didn't show any signs of slippage at all, in my personal view. But I mean, he definitely, if he did show any signs of slippage, he didn't show any signs of slippage like that.
Be real now. He ain't fight Triple G when Triple G was prime. And
yes, he did.
Triple G is a different subject because Triple G aged like milk. You know what I'm saying?
No, Triple G did not age like milk. If he were to age like milk, then he would have not had a draw, possibly a fight that he probably should have won in the first fight at like 35 over Canelo, then 36 in the rematch over Canelo, a fight that in my view Canelo just edged out, but still gave Canelo a tooth and nail fight. Still one of the best and most skilled fighters in the world. So to say that he aged like milk, like, what are you talking about?
So avoiding him.
It wasn't really until after the Canelo Alvarez fights that, overall that he started to show some major age. And I've seen certain fighters that after a certain fight or after a certain trilogy or rematch or whatever it is, that it just takes a chunk out of them and they're just never the same after that. I seen him with Deontay Wilder. He was never the same after those last 2 Tyson Fury fights. Now, I don't know 100% if he even want to beat guys like Zhang or Joseph Parker in the first place, but it was very apparent and very obvious that he just had a piece of his soul taken out in terms of the boxing game after those 2 fights. It just happens. Sometimes, certain fighters after a certain fight, they're just never the same again.
For a couple years, it makes a big ass difference. You know what I'm saying? Triple G body didn't hold up in a sport of boxing. He aged.
Yes, it did. How can you be 36 years old, and your body not hold up? That doesn't make any sense. And it's not like Gennady Golovkin was one of these guys that started, as late as what a Usyk or some of these other guys did, at least from what I believe, because he had like 40-something fights.
Very quick. And Canelo made sure of that. But tell me...
To me, what signs of slippage are is when you're fighting against fighters that should not be giving you that competitive of a fight, overall, and they're actually giving you some major problems. Like when Gennady was fighting guys like Steve Rolls and guys like Sergey Derevyanchenko, that was obvious when he was starting to show signs of slippage. But some may debate that he was showing signs of slippage against guys like Willie Monroe. But that was more of a fight where Gennady just wasn't taking him seriously and was more just trying to play with his opponent, just trying to play with his food. But when he did fight a real fighter in that of David Lemieux and that also of Danny Jacobs, he performed up to optimal.
Fighter that he fought in a fucking prime. He didn't even fight Floyd in his prime.
He fought Floyd, in my view, in the last peak performance of his career. So although Floyd was 36 years old, he still was at a peak form. Now maybe Canelo, because of his slower feet and him being tired and, Floyd just being a master level boxer, maybe it made, Floyd look greater or, faster than what he actually was. But I don't think so. I think that Floyd did show, however, clear signs of slippage, after that fight. And Manny Pacquiao did as well. But, overall, Manny Pacquiao and Floyd, they still were at an evenly great point in their career. So that still made that fight great.
And if Triple G is his best fight, then what are we talking about here? I don't want to hear about the best version of this, the best version of that. The bottom line is, so the goal is let's destroy Canelo Alvarez before Canelo beats him. And you see, he already talked like he didn't watch the fight. If this was another fight, Canelo would have knocked out Terence Crawford. He's already speaking as if he knows Terence Crawford is going to win.
And I understand where BRUCE MF VANE is coming from. It's very possible that that guy is trying to make excuses. And then overall, maybe not. Maybe overall he's coming from a logical perspective. But there's many people that love to do that in order to make excuses before the fight, just in order to not give that fighter credit or to make excuses for their favorite fighter losing. So I understand what he's saying.
And this is the other thing. If y'all seen that he was breaking down and he was slowing down and he's no longer the fighter that he used to be, blase split, when people were criticizing Canelo Alvarez, why was y'all getting upset? Because they were just seeing the things that you're currently describing now that he's fighting Bud.
And I do agree with that. I do agree with BRUCE MF VANE's point there. If you're one of these guys that was defending Canelo Alvarez tooth and nail, stating that, you're just hating on him because he looks aged and all sorts of stuff, blah, blah, blah. But then all of a sudden now you want to go completely at 180 because you want to make Canelo look better just in case he loses, then yes, that's something that's hypocritical.
But you couldn't see before he was fighting Bud. So you need to go back and apologize to the people that was criticizing Canelo. Because while you was calling them haters, they was obviously telling the truth that you'll end up echoing right now. Like I said, none of this shit y'all do makes sense. Okay? Explain that to the masses. Explain it. Now all of a sudden you see his flaws. Now all of a sudden he's slow. Now all of a sudden he hasn't knocked the guy out in blase split. If somebody brought up those reasons for him, if somebody brought up those reasons as a reason for him to not be pound for pound number one, you guys will reject everything that they just said.
Right, and I'm sure that fan base would, but once again, bro, who has put Canelo Alvarez as the true number one pound for pound fighter like over the past 2 or 3 years? Like, this is what I'm not understanding. The only thing that I can the only thing that I can think of that you're talking about is when Canelo was ranked number one pound for pound during those 3 years. But that doesn't make any sense because Canelo was deserving of it. So I can either option A, you're quote unquote thinking that Terence Crawford was deserving of the number one pound per pound spot when he wasn't, because the best win of his career was over Sean Porter. And I don't even know if he had that win at that point in time. Like, imagine overall a non-black fighter, with these LDBC channels. Imagine someone claiming that, overall some of these other guys, like let's just say, for example, that Virgil Ortiz was a 3-weight division champion, and the best win of his career was over a guy in Sean Porter who had lost to 3 of the top welterweights in the world. And they tried to claim that he's number one pound per pound. They'd be saying, what the fuck are you talking about? So, I don't know if BRUCE MF VANE is coming from the perspective that Canelo never deserved to be over Crawford, or if he's talking about the past 3 years. But once again, like, what are you talking about? No one's really had Canelo Alvarez other than the major Canelo Alvarez fanboys, for the past, 2 or 3 years.
Come on. Truth or not? So everything y'all say is a contradiction and backwards, because at the end of the day, what y'all want to do is, rather than to give Terence Crawford credit, that's how fucked up y'all are in boxing. You rather destroy Canelo Alvarez, or you would rather tell the truth now about Canelo Alvarez that people in the past couldn't tell you the truth without getting attacked, without being called names and this, that, and the third. Now all of a sudden you see all the things that they said about Canelo back then, now that he...
That's every major fan base, and I do overall agree with that. But that's why, once again, although I have certain, favorite fighters that I prefer to watch, like a Canelo or a Crawford or a Usyk or an Inoue, because those guys are phenomenal level fighters, I'm never a fan of any of these guys. And the reason why that is because you're going to make yourself look like a fucking idiot and a fool defending these guys tooth and nail. If you're a fanboy, you can never look at that perspective from an objective or logical view. You just can't, because you're always going to be busy defending them. And when it comes to have that point about speaking certain truths that might be uncomfortable for you, you're never going to be able to accept the truth.
Fighting Crawford. Shut the fuck up, man. Oh,
You can tell that BRUCE MF VANE has a lot of pent up anger, towards these guys. I get it to a certain degree, man. I mean, I don't necessarily deal with it from the Canelo Alvarez fan base. The main fan bases that I've had to fucking deal with it from has been the Deontay Wilder, Gervonta Tank Davis, and Terence Crawford fan bases.
Oh, man. All y'all is full of shit, man. Y'all ain't fooling nobody. At the end of the day, let's just keep it 100. Black, white, Indian, you know what I'm saying? Pakistani, let's all keep it 100. You guys have a problem with a black dominant champion being number one. Hey, it's not just you.
I mean, I definitely would agree with that overall for a certain amount of the non-black boxing fans, which is why, once again, you can't really count the average person's opinion. But that being stated, let's also cut the crap about black boxing fans apparently being these magnanimous overall boxing fans and all sort of shit. Because there's so many comments that I've seen overall talking about how Lomachenko was this complete hype job. He was someone that was never of any substance. Alexander Usyk is a guy that, he fights in a weak heavyweight era, right? But Deontay Wilder was a guy that allegedly was just fighting, he was a guy that was top 5 pound for pound, anyway. But, so I mean, the point is that, let's please cut the crap about, these black content creators or black boxing fans just being these magnanimous people. So I mean, it is what it is. Because Dante and Aki TV, they always try to push this bullshit about how these guys are more objective commentators. No, they're fucking not.
Black folks got a problem with this shit. But we gotta be honest, okay? Because we can stop all this bullshit if you just say, I can't stand black people to be dominant because to me they're always dominant and I want to see myself represented up there and I'll do anything and I'll go along with anything.
I agree. And the same thing that Aki TV and Dante's Boxing Nation and certain guys like that should say, and BRUCE MF VANE, whenever Alexander Usyk, and other fighters are looked at as the number 1 pound for pound fighter, they should also say the same thing. I don't want Alexander Usyk or Inoue or Canelo to be represented as the number 1 pound for pound fighter because I know that if they're remembered as the best fighter of their generation, that they're going to be put up there as debatably one of the greatest fighters of all time, up there with fighters like Ali and Mayweather, and that's going to dilute some of the black boxing greatness overall within that of the history of the sport, and I can't have that because I'm so insecure about myself that athletics in my mind is one of the only things that we're good at and the only real thing that we have. That's overall their perspective, which is why, once again, they hate it overall why Canelo Alvarez, overall, or Usyk or some of these other guys, overall, once again, when they're promoted as the number 1 pound for pound fighter, because in their mind, athletics is the only thing that they have, which is a very sad perspective. But that's the reason overall why, once again, they're so defensive whenever you put a Canelo Alvarez or some of these other guys, overall, at the number 1 pound for pound spot.
Artificial fighter, and I'll go along with any lie to make sure that you guys are never looked at as an elite, even though we secretly know if it wasn't for you, there'd be nothing to look up to, nobody to emulate, and nobody to compare to. Let's just be honest, man. Stop the bullshit. But this is the crazy part. Y'all talking crazy like this for somebody coming up 3 weight classes. It shouldn't even matter.
Well, he's not coming up 3 weight classes. He's coming up 2. But anyway.
You think Canelo has slowed down. The consistency.
And to talk about Terence Crawford once again, because people always bring up this point about Terence Crawford. Well, he started off at 135, right? And he did start off at 135. But just because a fighter starts off at a certain point in their career doesn't mean that they're going to be there forever. Take a look at Devin Haney. He's a guy that rehydrates at like 165. He made 135 at one time. He rehydrates 30 pounds over the weight limit, and it's only been like a couple of years. Oscar De La Hoya was a guy that was like, damn near 6 foot with a 74-inch arm reach, fighting guys like Pernell Whitaker and Chavez at 140 and 147. He's not a guy that's a natural 140-pounder, but he fought there. He was a guy that really should have been fighting at 154. But it is what it is.
Is a good big man will beat a good little guy any day. Isn't that the consensus? Okay.
Well, here's also the thing where I have to hold you accountable, Mr. BRUCE MF VANE. Because you've stated in the past that you don't believe that Canelo Alvarez is anything special, that you believe that he's just a good fighter, not a great fighter. Now, of course, do I agree with that? No. And I think anyone, of course, that knows anything about boxing would know that Canelo is an all-time great level fighter. You cannot be, where he's at and accomplish the things that he's accomplished and not be an all-time greatly skilled level fighter. It's just not possible. Not with his stature. But I mean, the thing is that, overall, and of course what he's done. But anyway.
Canelo's always all this until y'all get him into fights like this. The bottom line is.
But my question for you, Mr. BRUCE MF VANE, is where will you put Terence Crawford if he ends up winning this fight? Are you going to be one of these people overall that claim all this shit about how Canelo's not special, but then if Terence Crawford wins this fight, he's one of the greatest of all time? I have to ask that of you. Now, I'm not going to, quite hold you to that standard because I've at least heard you be quite consistent in the past that you don't believe that this fight is bigger for either of them. But for guys like Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV, these guys love to do this shit about how Canelo Alvarez is not this special fighter and he's overrated and he's not even closest to the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. And, he's really just an average Mexican fighter, blah, blah, blah. But then if Terence Crawford defeats Canelo Alvarez, he'll be the greatest of all time. That doesn't make any sense.
Y'all don't want to give Bud credit. If Bud was a Caucasian, if Bud was a Mexican, if Bud was y'all wouldn't be doing all this shit. Let's just be fucking honest, bro. I'm sick of you hoe-ass boxing content creators. And I'm going to be honest, man. It's very hard to get a sound opinion out of white boxing content creator. The only one...
Well, it's no offense. And although I would somewhat agree with you, it's very hard overall to get a good opinion or a good breakdown out of a lot of boxing content creators. But if we're going to be real, and I know that a certain amount of people are going to get offended by this, it is what it is. The hardest ones are the ones that are always the most emotional. Don't get it twisted. The ones that are debatably, the hating the most you could debate could be other fan bases like that of the Latino fan bases or that of the Caucasoid fan bases if you wanted to, at least against that of black fighters. But the ones that are hands down the most emotional and always stuck in the victimization rut, which always creates bitterness and excuses for their fighters overall to where it affects their analysis, it's always these pro-blackity black super liberal channels like that of, Aki TV and Dante's Boxing Nation. And Aki TV isn't even black. He just wishes he was. But, Dante's Boxing Nation, Boxing Ego, Blue Blood Sports TV to a degree, BRUCE MF VANE, 78 Sports TV, all these other guys. Like, it's no offense, but let's cut the crap about, these, a lot of these black content creators, overall just being so logical and objective all the time because they're some of the worst channels in terms of objectivity and logic because they're highly, highly emotional. Anyway.
That I've ever known that's been 100% pure and call it straight down the middle. I ain't never had to worry about shit is sporting fucking icons. But he's rare and he's not from America. You got the Mexicans doing this, and when you get the white boys, you get this shit. Y'all gotta stop with this petty old insecure ass shit. It's obvious as fuck, bro. And
right, so once again, if you're trying to make a point overall that the black content creators, I mean, don't get it twisted. There's some black content creators I think that are on point, like Boxing Wave and Hatman Strikes Back, certain guys like that. Boxing Gems, I don't know if he's black or not, but, he's someone that I think has a great channel as well. But this bullshit about, overall, with these white boys, I mean, don't get it twisted. Sure, you got guys out there, in my view, like Fight Film and BDA Boxing that have some racialized analyzations, no doubt about it. But, once again, the ones that I've encountered the most that are the most emotional and the ones that always have the victimization mentality bullshit, which always affects their analyzation to the point to where even if you try to put a non-black fighter as the number one pound for pound, they always have a problem with it. Once again, Dante and these guys, they never mind, non-black fighters as long as they're not an actual threat to the number one pound per pound spot. That's why they give credit to fighters like Caleb Plant and Josh Taylor and certain guys like that. But watch as soon as you put certain fighters like Usyk and Lomachenko, and Inoue and Canelo at the number one pound per pound spot. Watch what happens. So, I mean, it just is what it is. That being stated, of course, are there a certain amount of non-black fans that, of course, attack black fighters? Of course.
You think your women don't see it? Ah, damn. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm out.
Anyways, that pretty much is about it. But I understand where you're coming from, Bruce. But unfortunately, BRUCE MF VANE, although he brings up some good points, I think that his mind is something that, unfortunately, just, cannot really be studied in terms of logic or objectivity. It's just not, It just is what it is. He's let, unfortunately, the bitterness and a lot of overall the fans kind of get to him, which is very unfortunate. But that's why a lot of these channels, and not just the LDBC and the media, but a lot of these channels in general, including that of some of these other guys like BDA Boxing, they just let their judgment get way, way, way too clouded. That's why overall, pretty much the only two boxing channels that I usually recommend are Boxing Wave and Handman Strikes Back. That's really about it. And even a lot of professional fighters and coaches, they still overall let the bias get through to them at times. Even Paulie Malignaggi or Teddy Atlas or Andre Ward or Keith Thurman or certain guys like that, you can't even trust the majority of those guys. So, I mean, it just is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. I just thought that was very particularly interesting. But thank y'all so much for watching, and I'll talk to y'all later, and we'll see where this goes. Of course, because the big fight is just around the corner. So we'll see.